very welcome. Great to see such a great turnout for what is, I think, the first ever Michael Collins 22 Society in night in Letterkenny. I would like to give a particularly welcome to Jim Nevin from the Collins 22 Society. Jim has done a huge amount of work in organising tonight's event, and he's given us all the good advice and all the expertise that comes from many years of running these events. I would like to thank the local organising committee as well: Paddy Gilday, Doreen Sheridan, Kennedy, Johnny McCollum, Ali Moore, Frank O'Donnell, John Higgery, and also thanks to Stephen McCollum, who is filming tonight's events for us. I'd like to thank the local press and Highland Radio for their help in publicising this event and for their presence here tonight also. I'd like to thank Tootie and Cian O'Donnell, very talented brother and sister, for providing the music there. They're from a very talented... from a very musical family, except for their Andy Rushing. I would like to give a particularly special welcome to Joan Murphy and Mary Sabora, who are both grandnieces of Michael Collins. Mary is up here. Mary is here tonight all the way from Clonakilty, and Joan Murphy is a long-time resident of Letterkenny, and we're delighted to have them both here tonight. Joan will be speaking to you later on. I think all that really remains for me to do is to introduce you to our chairman for the night, a Letterkenny native, now resides in County Meath, and he's been General Secretary of Fine Gael since 1999, an avid Donegal GAA supporter, never misses a game. When I mentioned NA 21 and Collins 22, he said it was a tight game. But, he's your chairman for the night, and if we get through the night without some mention of Donegal GAA, it'll be a wee bit of a miracle. But he has a bit of leeway because Michael Collins and Sam Maguire were great colleagues and great friends, so he might manage to squeeze a bit of football in somewhere. Tom Curran.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. It's very heartening to see the number of people here tonight. And it's very heartening for those that founded the Collins 22 Society to see, coming to Letterkenny to see such a big crowd. And it's a tribute to those that organised the event. And I think I was asked about 4 months ago, down at some meeting or another, somebody sidled up to me and says, "Tom, would you like to go back to Letterkenny one of the evenings? I have something for you to do." And he says, "It's not at all political, you're not to do anything like that." And I says, "Grand, no bother, I'll do it." And then I discovered what it was. But as I see this evening, and what the Collins 22 Society is about, is to try and, for us now in the 21st century, to understand our history, to understand what role Michael Collins and the people of that generation play in shaping Ireland. And for us now, given all our difficulties and all the challenges that we face ahead, to try and see what inspiration can we take from Collins the man, Collins the politician, Collins the Minister for Finance, Collins the man who was involved in Irish culture, and Collins the writer. And what really impressed me about the lineup of speakers, apart from the fact that we were going to have a grandniece on the platform of Michael Collins, a man who, when an educated in Letterkenny in national school, secondary school, we didn't learn that much about Michael Collins. I've come now in later life to have a full appreciation of all that was involved at that time. And in some ways, what was decided at the treaty and decisions taken and sides taken and so on, in some ways you see history repeating itself in Northern Ireland. And that's what's brilliant, apart from Joan being here, is we have a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly from a very different tradition here, and it shows how we need all to work together and how from history we can learn valuable lessons, and it gives us a greater understanding of very different cultures, different traditions. And again, just to say, it is a political meeting, not a party political meeting, but it is a political meeting. Because politics is what makes the difference, and politics is about public service. And we're here tonight to hear about a man who epitomised, in my view, public service in the right way. Now, we have a long list of speakers. I'm told they all won't be too long. And it's about somebody, when we were outside earlier, we want to hear it, warts and all. It's not about propaganda. It's about truth. And it's about having a greater realization. If we understand where we have come from and the sacrifices people have made, we have a better chance in terms of charting our choppy water that lies ahead. So the first person I want to introduce is somebody that has done tremendous work with the Collins 22 Society. When they started, and I remember when they started, people thought they were mad. And we all know about Bail na Blah and all of that sort of stuff. But this was something different. And Jerry O'Connell, who's here, who's a Dublin-based solicitor, and we were to travel up together this evening, but he got delayed because, like all good solicitors, he had to appear in the High Court today on behalf of a client. I didn't have time to ask him whether he was successful or not, and he wouldn't tell me anyway. But Jerry has been one of the founders. He's one of the great modern exponents of Michael Collins. He's somebody that practices politics as well as practicing law. He is somebody that believes in the idealism of Michael Collins. He's a Tipperary man. He doesn't know much about football, but he knows plenty about other things. And I just want you now, without much ado, and to introduce Jerry O'Connell to you. Thank you very much.
Tarastáis, Cahirlach, Chocladali, Bowden, Chinol, Chushkartna Hearden, a Cardi Illig, August, a Cardi Vale. It's Moor and Nor Dumsa, Mar Oraj, a Hort's doing our son and Quillanach, Mihala Quillan, August, our son and Cuman, Mihala Quillan. It's a great honour for me to be in Donegal tonight, ladies and gentlemen. As I was passing through the forecourts, I think the best way to describe it is it was more of a scoreless draw than a winner or defeat for anyone this evening. But I can see the bullet holes in the pillars which hold that building up. I can see the shell marks on the edifice of the forecourts grinning down on the North Quays in Dublin City. As you walk through the central courtyard of that great building where justice in this republic is administered, and the clatter of heels across the long stone corridor through the forecourts, you're immediately brought back to that day in 1922 when the forecourts were shelled and the first shots of the Irish Civil War were fought. Comrade against comrade, former friend against former friend, separated by a body of water across from Ireland's forecourts in June 1922. The holes on the pillars of the forecourts are still there as witness and testament to that day. So when we talk about what we do in our current lives, ladies and gentlemen, I think the time of 1922, 1919 and 1921 and figures like Michael Collins resonate and intertwine in our lives on an everyday basis. And sometimes we don't seem to realise it. The most recent Gael skull that was opened in this country is Gaelscoil Mihály Chaileán in Clonakilty, named after Michael Collins. On the 16th of October of this year, just 3 weeks ago, the front page photograph on the Cork Examiner newspaper was a woman kneeling down at prayer at Michael Collins' grave in Glasnevin Cemetery. Collins' legacy, his influence and his life story, I believe, is all pervasive and still amongst us. And that's why we are having nights like tonight, and by you all coming here and prepared to listen about our great patriot is in itself a manifestation of how Collins still is relevant in Irish life. I'll be very brief. There's far more distinguished speakers than me going to speak to you tonight. I'm just going to tell you a little story about this society. It was founded in 2002 at the site of the 1848 rebellion on a hillside near Ballingarry in South Tipperary. It sounds very evocative and romantic, but in the parish of Ballingarry, near where I'm from, we have one great claim to fame. It was the first place where the green, white and gold tricolour was flown before the 1848 Young Ireland Rebellion. And a group of us got together in the winter of 2002, and it was just coming up to the anniversary of the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty back in 1921. And the question was posed, how is it that Michael Collins appears to have been airbrushed out of Irish life? How is it that an entire generation, maybe even 2 generations of people, have gone through formal education in this republic without knowing the Michael Collins story? And how is it takes a Hollywood film to bring Michael Collins back into the centrality of Irish life? And that's where we started from. We started as an ordinary group of people, farmers and teachers and carpenters and students and housewives and whatever, and got together and decided to found a society. And we got involved with the Collins family. We set up a website, generalmichaelcollins.com, and as a short-term aim, we decided we'd try and make sure that it would be a central receptacle for all online material on Michael Collins. So the stuff started to come in. Stuff like receipts for the Irish National Loan. The Irish National Loan in 1920, 1921 was when the ordinary 5/8 of the country put their hands in their pockets and financed the Dáil government that Michael Collins was Minister for Finance for. So we saw people sending in receipts and dockets signed by Michael Collins, propaganda pictures of Michael Collins giving speeches in places like Clonmel and Carrick-on-Shore for the Irish National Loan, and gradually it grew and grew. And we travelled to different parts of the country, and all we asked for is that people will take a little bit away from the memory of Collins leaving and may be inspired to ask more questions, to tell your children about him, tell your grandchildren about him. When your child comes to you and say they have an essay to do in school, maybe they might consider talking about Michael Collins. You know, open up Michael Collins and open up the memory of Collins to your lives. That's essentially the practical mission statement of our society. And the 3 things I really want to speak about tonight, apart from that by way of background, is firstly, we want to perpetuate the name of Michael Collins because we believe he's the most significant figure in 20th century Irish history and the man who made democracy possible in Ireland. Those are 2 very bald statements. But in our view, in terms of the contribution to Irish political life in the 20th century, General Michael Collins has no equal in terms of what he achieved. And we feel his name should be perpetuated for that reason and that reason alone. We also feel that there is always a danger that we could revert back to the bad old days, when in 1965, for example, the Irish government published facts on the Irish state, and there was no mention of Michael Collins. Good, bad or indifferent in that official government publication. And the fear is that we would have had back in 2002, and I think it's now thankfully become unfounded, is that Collins' name will be forgotten once more. So we seek to perpetuate his name by the very fact that there are 200, 250 people gathered in a hotel room tonight here in Letterkenny for one reason and one reason only, to hear about Michael Collins. And that in itself perpetuates his name. The second reason we founded the society is we wanted to honour his ultimate sacrifice. War is a dirty business. The Irish revolutionary period is strewn with episodes which are no fairy tale. But whatever you slice, dice or boil Béal na Bláth down to, essentially it was a man making the ultimate sacrifice in pursuit of defending a settlement that was approved by the ballot box in 1922. And we want to honour that ultimate sacrifice, and at 11 o'clock every Saturday, members of our society maintain General Collins' grave at Glasnevin Cemetery. It's one of the core things that we do, and something we're very proud of, and everything that we raise from the society that we don't need in terms of cost goes into putting fresh flowers on Collins' grave at 11 o'clock every Saturday, 52 weeks a year, every day, every single Saturday of the year. And it's amazing when you see Glasnevin Cemetery, which is, I suppose, Ireland's national graveyard, gets more postal orders, gets more floral requests from all over the world for one grave and one grave only in that cemetery, and that's General Collins' grave. So we have people who are members of our society who have been tending Collins' grave since the 1940s, who would have been sons of members of the squad, of his Dublin squad, his key activists in the War of Independence. And that continues with the work of our society. But finally, and I'll leave you with this point, we believe the most important thing that you can try and do with an organisation like the Collins 22 Society is that you can inspire people to aspire to his life principles. Because I believe, as a young person with an interest, a passing interest in politics, and an interest, I suppose, in the law and the workings of the law, that everything of Collins' life is an example to the new generation of Irish people of how to conduct oneself. His life principles were marked by courage. Courage is the one thing perhaps you think of more so than anything else when you talk about Collins. Courage, not just physical courage, but mental courage, psychological courage, the courage of one's convictions, the courage to fight a very divisive political contest and see it out to the end. He also had marvellous organisational skills and administrative ability. And the fact that the Irish National Loan, some speakers might refer to it later, what actually got off the ground. I suppose you could say it was the original bailout, or the original bailout programme. It was when the ordinary people gathering in 4 crossroads right across the country bailed out the Dáil government and made sure that revolutionary government could exist and operate in Ireland in 1919 and 1920. And that administrative skill, that key organisational nous that he brought to all the different hats that he wore, is something that we should try and aspire to in terms, and it's a challenge I would lay down to the political and civic leaders of this country, that in bad times when people lived in the fear of the gun in Irish life in 1919, 1920, 1921, there were people of the administrative ability of General Collins to get this country up off its knees and moving, and we need to see that happen again. Also, he was a man with a tremendous grasp, I believe, of an empathy for society, for people on the margins of society, for the elderly and for the young. 2 groups in society I believe Collins cherished dearly. And we know relatively little in answer to that key question of what would have happened had he survived the Bale-na-Bla ambush, had he continued on. He was Commander-in-Chief of the National Army at that point, probably would have very soon been chairman of the provisional government. There was an Northern strategy, military strategy, sort of coming to an end at that stage as well. Who knows what he would have achieved? But we have small little clues. The Path to Freedom, the posthumously published collection of short essays which set out what Collins' vision would have been for Ireland. And it was a progressive vision. It was a can-do vision. It was about channeling natural resources, fair division of assets and resources for people, building a real republic, renewing old Gaelic culture and reviving not just language for language's sake, but reviving that great spirit of Gaelic civilization and engendering it into the 1920s with an Irish people, with a new government in Dublin, putting its best foot forward in every single sector. That's what I think the Collins message and the Collins vision would have been. And I think we should always try and aspire to those principles of courage, of massively high standards in public office, and also of progressive thought in society. We are campaigning for the erection of his statue, and that's my final message to you. There's no statue to General Collins, full, proper statue in the city of Dublin. His bust is in Merrion Square. There's a number of different small memorials throughout the city, but there is no statue. I think that's ludicrous. I think that's something that should change. I don't think the Americans would stand for that with George Washington. I don't think the French would stand for it. I don't think there's any race in Europe that would stand for it. And I do take people's views that, you know, there were two sides to the great conflict in the 1920s. And the Civil War was a total disaster for the new Irish state. And it engendered some of the most negative and poisonous elements that a new state just absolutely should have avoided at all costs. But we believe that there is a place, surely a place, for a statue to Michael Collins to be raised in Dublin before 2022 and the 100th anniversary of his death. And that is our ultimate goal as members of the Collins 22 Society. I thank you all for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I want to introduce somebody who's no stranger to many of you here. Somebody that has done a tremendous job. I think historians, and particularly local historians, are very important. It gives you really a good sense and place. And I think having an understanding of where you come from really helps people in trying to work out what they want to do. And I think our next speaker, Niall McGinley, has done that on behalf of particularly the community in Donegal. He has done a brilliant piece of work in terms of acknowledging and naming and honouring those who fought, particularly in the First World War. So I'd like to introduce now to you Niall McGinley, who will have a historical look at this Michael Collins. Thank you.
Yes. There were three Michaels, I think, who were outstanding men in recent Irish history. Michael Dwyer of Wicklow, who held against the British for 14 years. Michael Davitt, who gave the farmers of Ireland security in their land. And Michael Collins. Am I not on the microphone? No? Sorry. Do I keep near to it or what? What about that now? Is that any better? Not too loud. Well, there's no way to repeat that, I suppose. However, when I was asked about Michael Collins, I went to a man whom I know in Letterkenny, and I said to him, I mentioned that, he says, I am not an admirer of Michael Collins. I don't admire his violence. I said, fair enough, there was plenty of violence in it. So for that reason, I thought I'd give the background of it. If you'll bear with me as briefly as I can. Between 1600 and 1800, let's go back a bit, we suffered, as you well know, under British terrorism. Now, I'm sure David Cameron would have been very indignant of me talking in those terms of it, but it was terrorism and it was sectarian. Under three headings: education, religion and land. Education first. You couldn't be educated unless you became one of the 20% of the people, the Protestants. 80% couldn't be educated, and so whatever education you got, and that's primary education really, had to be done in secret, in a high school, barn or something like that. Daniel O'Connell had to be smuggled to France to get education. Number one. Number two, religion. Johnny McCollum, I can tell you about that. The monument up in Sentry Hill, where mass couldn't be said except in some remote area, and a sentry had to be posted to watch out the bridges. Soldiers didn't come. Worse than that, the unbelievable, adding injury to insult, we had to pay tithes to the Protestant religion, the established church, Church of Ireland, what they call it now. And lastly, the land. Landlords were above the law virtually. I'm living on the site of the Derry Bay evictions now, happened in 1861. The poor people paid the rent, walked across the hills of snow to John George Adair's, or Glenveigh Castle, and paid the rent. There was no reason why they should be evicted, yet 250 or so of them were evicted, thrown out on the road. Children, women. You know the story. So we suffered. How we survived, I don't know. Lastly, the famine. I'm not going to spend hours talking about the famine. One thing might put it in perspective. In 2003, you probably all saw the famine in Darfur, in Africa, where 100,000 people died of hunger, out of a population of 27 million. In Ireland, it was anything from 1 million to 1.9 million, out of a population of 8 million. That was the last straw, and that was like really what made people form the Irish Republican Brotherhood, or the Fenians. That famine was like a branding iron, put in the fire, red hot, burnt into the hide of a bullock, never to be erased. Michael Davitt was a Fenian. He turned from it after a lot of hardship in prisons in England, and took to what we call, I suppose, democratic action, and spearheaded the Land League. Collins was prominent in the IRB, chairman, I suppose, of it for a long time. My father was a member of the IRB, although he joined it in Omagh, but never heard about them afterwards. I suppose the first fruit of it was the Easter Rising. Collins thought the Easter Rising was a bit of a, well, as a military escapade, he thought it was a farce. It wasn't, well, it didn't make any progress militarily. And there's one thing that that worries me about when the man said to me about violence. There were more civilian deaths in Easter week than there were either soldiers, police, or volunteers. And 3 times as many civilians wounded. So it was indiscriminate, really. Now to local things. In Letterkenny, in September 1917, the volunteers, branch, Company of the Volunteers, was founded in a little hall behind Voodoo. It's called the Sinn Féin Hall. Their aim was to interfere with recruiting for the First World War, which it did. One of their slogans was, join the British Army and see the next world. As you probably heard before. They had no guns, old Italian guns, so the idea was go somewhere where there are guns. They raided Fanet Coast Guard Station, got some guns. In McQuinn, 1920, in May 1920, they raided an RIC barracks and got some guns there. Unfortunately, there was a casualty, a death. But anyway, when my father came back to the town that night, and he was fairly shaken by it all, the county inspector of the RIC, they both, he lived at that time where Mourne Antiques was, and before that, after his time, Willie Drumgoller, Patsy, lived there. And opposite almost where McMullen's solicitors is, that's where the county inspector and the district inspector. The county inspector came into the district inspector and says, that was McGinley and his gang. And the district inspector said, I saw him in Castlereagh. Oh, well, he says, mustn't have been him. But the district inspector was Patrick Walsh from Castleblaney. I had more to say about him. One day Sergeant Grattan, some of you may know Sergeant Grattan, he lived in the High Road. Those are gone now, and his daughter May Grattan and Henry Grattan. Sergeant Grattan called across to my father, the house I told you about, and said, District Inspector Patrick Walsh wants to speak to you. I says, okay. And over he came. And they said, I'm the new DI, you can trust me. So my father replied, I'm not in the habit of trusting DIs. However, he was a bit taken back because Willie Holmes and Jamal had left in some bullets and they were sitting there in a tin box. And there was Sinn Féin literature. British officer then came to the door and watched me, called him, says, round the house, he says, don't let anyone in. And Walsh went into the room and put the bullets in his pocket and the Sinn Féin literature in another pocket. And that was that. After the truce, Walsh came back to my father and says, get back the bullets and the literature. And he said to him, I hope it's all over now. And they shook hands. Now, the question is, had Collins made contact with Patrick Walsh or not? And I went up to the man who spoke to me about violence first, Hugh Duffy of College Road, whom you may know, retired teacher. His uncle, John Duffy of Athenry, was in the RIC. I think he was in Athlone. And he got a message from Michael Collins to meet him in a hotel in Dublin. Some of the local volunteers must have told him he would be sympathetic. So John Duffy went up to him and met him and talked to him, and obviously must have agreed to pass on information. And that was the key to Collins' success. All down history, the spy system of the English defeated us. Owen O'Neill in 1640 was followed by spies all around Brussels. It is thought that Reg O'Donnell was poisoned in St. Andrews, and there's no end to it. But that's where Collins, he got under the skin. Imagine knowing about John Duffy and having contact with him. And John Duffy saved countless lives. And Hugh told me, he says, what's amazing is how he got away with it. in his own station or barracks. So it's likely, but I have no proof of it, that Patrick Walsh was in cahoots with Collins. Quickly to finish off, Collins floated a loan for the first dial, to keep it in finance naturally, and my father was down in Rossnakill, and he thought a harmless enough thing. He was advocating the dial loan, looking for money for it, and he was arrested. On the 12th of December 1919, spent 6 months in Derry jail and Mountjoy. I'm not going to talk about Civil War or anything like that. I've written about it. And people can. Next thing I wanted, after the Civil War. No. My father, I suppose he must have met him obviously, Michael Collins, the second dial. He certainly had a terrific admiration for him, and of course he held that nothing would have been accomplished without his work. So I'd like to read just, remember Michael Collins was the son of a small farmer living in the town under Woodfield outside Clonakilty. And this was the man who took over from England after 700 years. And read what happened in Dublin Castle at that time. Dublin Castle was built in the about 1222, 700 years later, yeah, by order of King John. On January the 16th, 1922, the Provisional Government Chairman Michael Collins took over the administrative machinery of Ireland in Dublin Castle. The King's Deputy, Lord Fitzalan, handed over authority in a quiet ceremony described by one of the departing officials thus. A few minutes later, the Lord Lieutenant appeared, and the ministers, some of whom 6 months before had a price on their heads, were introduced to His Excellency. And then he said, was it drama? The drama of 700 years? Or was it drama, comedy, farce, or tragedy? Was about to be played out. The curtain was about to fall on the last act and the last scene. So simple, it's amazing. Well, I'll come to this later. On January the 31st, the 1st Regiment of the Irish Army, the Dublin Guards, marched past City Hall, down Dame Street to take over Beggar's Bush Barracks from the British Army. As City Hall was where the government operated from, administered from, at Upper Dame Street. And after the march passed, Collins was taking it, of course, in the form of a platform or something. Collins was heard to say, a rashig upper. He knew that it was work, an enormous task, but he had the energy for it. Now, on the 9th of February, the 7th of February, a letter arrived on Patrick Walsh's desk in Letterkenny saying that his name had been recommended for a committee which was going to establish the Garda Síochána. And he was recommended by Dr. McGinley, and the letter is, I think, a copy of it in the Garda station up there. But that meeting was held, and again, my father was on the committee. He was a TD at the time, so on the committee, in the Gresham Hotel on the 9th of February. Now, the rest I have in the note here, but I remember as well. The next is an incident I'd like to see commemorated in Letterkenny. On the 28th of March, Tuesday 28th of March, the RIC gathered their ammunition, of which is plenty of rifles, putting it into armoured cars. Up in McCool's pub on the Market Square, the volunteers in their caps and ordinary coats was gathered enough rifles. They marched down up the street to where McMullen's solicitors are and took over from this well-paid, well-clad, well-armed police force. And James McMonigal was there at the time, and he said to me, before he died, I looked down the Port Road, a dismal, dreary day like today. 700 years of English rule, who gives a damn? And the armoured car moved off to Derry. The last incident now I want to mention, I hope I haven't spoken for too long, was sometime in September, I don't know the date exactly, when the first batch of guards arrived by CDR train in Letterkenny, unarmed, and they had to take a very circuitous route to get here because they would have been shot by the anti-treaty forces. And my father and Dr. Moore from St. Connell's met them at the station and marched up the Port Road. Eventually they took, they were sent to various stations, unarmed guards. Stability was now here, and a new Ireland and an independent democratic Ireland was established. And, well, there was one person to thank for it, according to my father, the Kingpin, Michael Collins. That's it.
Places that you can relate to, and it's just great when people have the gift and the knowledge and the talent to be able to make history come alive for us. And I think it's a tribute to you, Niall, for what you've done. And undoubtedly, it's very important that that sort of history is acknowledged and should be commemorated in some way. So I'd like to thank you very much, Niall, for what you've done for us today. And I know for the Collins Committee, they in planning it here weren't aware of any connection, but they knew there had to be one, but they weren't aware of any connection. And they found all sorts of connections already. And isn't it about discovering our history, regardless of what way it is? And we've been very good at that lately in terms of acknowledging all sorts of things in our past and coming to terms with them, both historical and otherwise. And what I want to do now is introduce, and we're going to have a little tea and coffee break after the next speaker, so you'll all be hoping there probably won't be too long. And because the social side is important and for people to chat and so on, and then we'll resume. But I want to introduce our minister here, who wants to talk about, well, what lessons does Michael Collins teach us for now and the future? So I know well, Dinny McGinley, Minister for the Gaeltacht.
Thank you very much, Tom. And listening to Niall McGinley there, I felt, was living through a lesson in living history. And he spoke of his father, a great man, a great patriot, and a great servant to the people of Donegal. And I had a first-hand encounter with your father, and came through the ordeal and lived to tell the tale. It had nothing to do with what we are here tonight about, but he removed my tonsils.
Didn't get a bullet or anything.
Not quite. And delighted, and I want to compliment the Collins 22 Society for giving us the opportunity of having this meeting here in Letterkenny tonight. And I don't want to start off on a discordant note. I know that there are many people here, obviously you're all interested in Michael Collins. You may be of different persuasions in other areas, but I would like to recall a little story, a little incident that happened where Joe McHugh and I worked, and others before us, in Dáil Éireann. I'm just going to tell the story to just show how things have changed. In 1969, in April 1969, there was a ferocious row in Dáil Éireann. Probably it wasn't the first row, and it certainly won't be the last. It had to do with a book that was published by the Department of Foreign Affairs, or External Affairs as they were known at that time. And the name of that book was Facts About Ireland. Many chapters in that book I had in my hand yesterday, Thursday, in the Dáil. Many pictures, chapters, different aspects of Irish life and history, and it came to the political history of the country then, and there was a representation there of Cuchulainn, and there was a representation there as well of Brian Boru and other great warriors. There was one there of Wolfe Tone, Daniel O'Connell, Michael Davitt, who has already been mentioned here tonight, and Charles Stewart Parnell. There was a portrait there of Padraig Pearse, and also one of Eamon de Valera. But there was one name and one portrait that was not there. And it was raised to the Dáil, why was Michael Collins not in that book? That was government publication, and it was said at the time that he wasn't there because he just played a minor role in the War of Independence. That was 1969. And I just told that story to show how things and our perception of Michael Collins has changed in the meantime. Not alone is he a great hero to the Fine Gael party, the founder of our party, he is revered also by members of the Fianna Fáil party, the Labour Party, other parties, even Sinn Féin recognise his contribution to what we have in this country. And what happened in '69 was not an accurate reflection of how Collins was seen by his own contemporaries. A leading anti-treaty Republican, Tom Barry, Cork, Munster, guerrilla leader, former veteran of the First World War, and so on, in a television interview recalled a remarkable scene. It was 1922, the Civil War was raging. Barry, like other Republicans, was a prisoner in Kilmainham jail. Barry was one of the cells at the top of the landing with Oscar Traynor, another great man who contributed to the independence of this country, when in his words, that's Barry's words, we heard the hubbub outside. We walked out onto the landing, didn't walk out of jail, we walked out onto the landing. I looked down, he says, and saw a most remarkable sight. There were about 700 or 800 men there, all down on their knees, and they saying the rosary for the repose of the soul of Michael Collins. One time he was their leader against the British. Then he was Commander-in-Chief of the enemy forces, the established government. Barry's words, in my opinion, showed the influence, respect, and for many, the hero worship that Collins earned during the fight for independence. Even his opponents were heartbroken and grieving for his death at Ballinablaw. The hero worship Collins attracted wasn't simply because he embodied the New Republic, young, charismatic, and passionate. History suggests that there was no one more important in the War of Independence than Michael Collins. We all know the history of Irish rebellions. They were usually short, very often ineffective, but the War of Independence was different, however. It is remembered as a war that brought the great British Empire to the negotiating table and ended British rule on most of this island. Much of that, in my opinion, was down to the work of Michael Collins. That comment is not meant to diminish in any way the contribution of others. There were many, many great figures who played key roles. It is simply to highlight just how crucial Collins was, for no one else was so directly involved in every key area with his decisions, the difference between success and failure. His fundraising, as already been mentioned, funded the War of Independence, the First and the Second Dáil, international lobbying, the propaganda machine. It made the Irish Republic not just a slogan, but a reality in the eyes and experience of many. His spy network fatally undermined what had been Britain's trump card, its informers and spies in all past rebellions. His administrative skills made the Republic a functioning reality, while his common sense and realism tempered the more unrealistic ideas of others in the leadership. He kept the leadership's feet on the ground and, if I may say so, guns in their hands and money in their pockets. That is perhaps why Republicans mourn Collins, the memory of Collins. They recognise that he was at the heart of everything the revolution achieved. As this country prepares to leave the bailout and regain control of our finances, it is appropriate to remember Collins' role as Minister of Finance. It may have been less glamorous than being Spy Master-in-Chief, but in many ways the war could not have happened without it. It is believed that his fundraising raised a massive 1.370 million, 1 million of it incidentally in the United States. That was equivalent to 44 million euros in today's currency. A colossal sum, considering it was raised by a small group of fundraisers starting off with nothing, all of whom were on the run and members of an illegal Dáil and in the face of the might of the world's biggest empire. That money enabled the Dáil to function, enabled the New Republic to send ambassadors to seek international recognition. It enabled its widely praised propaganda team to challenge the British spin in the media. It armed the army of the Republic. It enabled the takeover of local government system by the Dáil. It enabled the running of an independent court service. Without that money, there would have been no arms for Flying Collins to use, no government for Eamon de Valera to lead, no local government system for Cosgrave to control as he did, no resources for Desmond Fitzgerald and others to mount their successful propaganda campaign. The fundraising was so successful and drew so much international amazement that Lenin, from the new Russian Republic, asked for and got a loan of some money from the fledgling Irish Republic, giving us some of the old Russian crown jewels as collateral. And if I'm not mistaken, those crown jewels were to be found in the vaults of Dublin Castle until comparatively recently. There may be others here who may know more about that than I do, but I know that they did rest there for a number of generations. Collins's counter-espionage role is much more widely known. For years, the ability of the British to had given them a key advantage. So he decided to trump the British at their own game. The top secret spy reports being supplied to the Dublin Metropolitan Police and Republicans were being read by Ned Broy and passed on to Collins. And you all heard, and some of you probably did read, The Spy in the Castle. Dave Nelligan ended up with the Irish Free State Army afterwards, and the name Nelligan may be familiar to some of you who may have had occasion to go to one of the top clinics in Dublin. Maurice Nelligan, who performed the first heart bypass in this country and who passed away suddenly, was the nephew of that same Dave Nelligan. And I had the pleasure and the privilege of having a meal with Dave Nelligan many, many years ago when he was in UCD and addressed one of our Historical Society meetings. In effect, Collins was spying on the British spies and using Britain's own records to find out the identity of British spies in the Republican movement. There was much more to Collins, but perhaps his greatest characteristic was his realism. Some in the Republican movement were so devoted to unrealistic goals that they risked not achieving what actually was achievable. They lived in a fantasy world that had little to do with the war or with the real Ireland of the 1920s. Collins was the voice of sanity, the voice of reality. The man who could tell reality from fantasy. That put him at odds with the President de Valera, another brilliant man, but whose ideas, such as the disastrous attack at the Customs House that nearly wiped out the IRA in Dublin, as it left them exposed in public view and led to their arrest, were rarely tempered by practical realities and sometimes caused problems rather than solving them. That sense of realism led Collins to endorse the treaty, not because it gave him all he wanted, but because he knew that the Irish at that time could not get more, and if the war was continued, they would end up later on with a worse deal because the army, and he knew the army was exhausted, and the supply of munitions was drying up. He did what he believed was the best deal possible in the circumstances, even though he knew it would cost him his life. We all know his comments to one of the signatories of the British side that he was signing his. Far too many did not grasp the fact that the pristine republic they wanted to achieve was beyond the means of the old IRA to deliver at that time. Collins realized different tactics would be needed to get the republic. He said the treaty, he saw the treaty rather, as freedom to achieve freedom, to bank the gains made and then build on them. So friends, what lessons does the story of Collins give us in 2013. First of all, it shows how individuals can make a difference, even against a supposedly unbeatable opponent, if they have the skills, passion, commitment and determination, as Colin said. Secondly, it shows the importance of being practical. Although through Collins's life, he kept a strong grasp on reality. He did not become so blinded by fanciful dreams and fanaticism that he had lost a sense of the possible. He wrote to Desmond Fitzgerald, the father of Garret Fitzgerald, in 1922, of his vision for Ireland, the Ireland he hoped to achieve. And I quote, "What we must aim at is the building of a sound economic life in which great discrepancies cannot occur. We must not have destitution or poverty at one end, and at the other an excess of riches in the possession of a few individuals, beyond what they can spend with satisfaction and justification. The growing wealth of Ireland will, we hope, be diffused through all our people, all sharing in the growing prosperity, each receiving what each contributes in the making of that prosperity, so that the wealth of all is ensured." End of quote. It simply means that we all must have a vision that is doable, that is possible, that is achievable and real, and commit ourselves fully and totally to the service of our people and our country, just as Michael Collins, so many others of that generation did. We owe that to his memory and to Ireland. I think it was Niall, in conclusion, I think it was Niall again, who mentioned the handover of power in 22 in Dublin Castle, with the Viceroy there, the King's representative in Ireland, and the story is told, Niall, that Collins was 10 minutes late for the handover. The Viceroy said to him, "You've kept us waiting 10 minutes. And Collins said, "You kept us waiting 700 years. Thank you,
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Certainly, we can draw a number of conclusions from that, and I'm going to leave those conclusions to you to draw. We're going to have a break now for tea and coffee, and then we'll resume. And one of the things I'm looking forward to in the second half of this is hearing the likes of John and others who coming from a different perspective on Michael Collins. Because I always find, when I look at Irish history, I always feel uncomfortable. Because sometimes history tells us a lot about ourselves and whether we, and for example, if you look at one of the things that has shocked me has been about the Magdalen laundries. And I've asked my other family members, because my kids have asked me, well, do you remember any of those places? And I can say, no, I don't, because I never heard them mentioned. And you wonder why, and you live through history, and you don't notice, and you don't observe, and you don't take it in. And I think the lesson for us, in living through the time now, and this is a real crisis in Irish society, we don't let it go over our heads without learning from it and observing and acknowledging the good and the bad. There are some of the things that this type of night can teach us. So we're going to tea and coffee now. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. One of the things that really strikes me is how much we've matured as a society and changed as a society. And some of the things that were being said by our first three speakers made me feel uncomfortable. You know, about some of our history and things that happened and maybe people who weren't acknowledged and all that sort of stuff. And I was thinking about the modern parallels of what we've been talking about. And you know, as to whether what happens now, and as uncomfortable it might have been for any of us, one of the things that really heartened me was when John McAllister said that he would come along. And you know, our historians were talking about Britain's history here and so on, and I was thinking, John is coming from a very different tradition, and maybe I was wondering and how uncomfortable maybe he felt, or maybe he didn't at all. But what I really want to do is, I really admire somebody like John that comes along tonight and to share with us from a very different tradition and a different perspective. And we're all in this together for a short period of time on this planet. So, John.
Thank you and good evening. I suppose a couple of things. I was really just invited along. Joe McHugh said to me, look, come up, we'll have a couple of pints of Guinness and we'll have a good night. And then he eventually texted me when I was driving up and said, look, John, you better say a few words when you hear this Michael Collins thing. So that's how I ended up coming to this. My connection, I will be saying a wee bit about NI21 and where we are in the political sense. My party colleague, Basil McRae, lived in Ramelton for a few years in his early childhood. I was holidaying last year in Rathmullen, and I went past the school, the Brownlow school where Basil attended school, and I sent him a text to say, you'll never believe it, Basil, they've renamed that school after you. And for the next, then I didn't think he would have believed me, that I saw him tweeting it. And after that, when I go home now, I'm going to tell him there's a statue of him in Letterkenny. And we had a great time in Rathmullen on holidays last year. The one good week of weather in the summer of 2012, we managed to get it in Rathmullen, and we had a wonderful time. I did wonder, going into a few of the bars. I went in for a drink one night and said to the owner, you know, I'm a great friend of Deputy Joe McHugh. I wondered why I kept getting thrown out of places. And then I eventually caught on, and anytime anybody asked me about Joe McHugh, I'd never heard of him. But Joe's been a good friend for a number of years now, both in the British Irish, and I certainly the work that he's involved in, both with the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly and chairing the Good Friday Agreement committee in Dáil Éireann, I think is vital, and certainly he's a fine ambassador for this part of Ireland, and indeed well known across these islands. So it's always a pleasure to be in your company, Joe, and tonight is no exception. So I suppose turning to the main subject, Chairman, what on earth would Michael Collins think about tonight's speaker, as in me? Of course, I'm sure I'm not the only one thinking that question. I, of course, stand in a very different political tradition to that of Collins. Politically, I share much more in common with those who were his opponents in the War of Independence, and those who sat in the other side of the negotiating table from him. That said, Corkman Collins' main bone of contention with me is probably that I'm from the great county of Down. There are, however, some points of contact between my politics as a 21st century pro-union Stormont representative and the politics of Michael Collins. Firstly, as with Collins, this island is my home. My family have lived in the same townland for the past 220 years, so I don't think you could say I'm a settler or a blow-in in recent times. This island, its story, its geography, its rich cultures, is my home, just as much as it was Michael Collins's. Secondly, like Collins, I strongly support a treaty that has brought progress to Ireland, in my case, the agreement. Both treaty and agreement were principled compromises to achieve peace and stability. I think even the Minister, when he was speaking just before the break, acknowledged that Collins didn't get everything he wanted in the treaty, as all of us would acknowledge that even the agreement in 98, not everybody got what they wanted. Compromises have to be made. You don't make peace with your friends, as it were. This leads me to what might be a third point of contact, recognising the need for change. In the Doyle debates of the treaty, Collins famously responded to those invoking ancient struggles. And I quote, deputies have spoken about whether dead men would approve of it, but few have spoken about whether the living would approve. There are still some promoting myths about ancient struggles, but the living should not be condemned to continually refight old battles. Change, political, social and economic, reinvigorates, brings new opportunities and unleashes potential. Collins saw that a politics which was set its face against change serves neither the present nor the future. So just want to say a few words about NI 21 and new politics for a new Northern Ireland. Thinking of Collins' words, let me briefly turn to my party and its place in Northern Ireland politics. A new politics for a Northern Ireland that has come of age. That's how I described NI 21 at the launch of our party earlier this year. NI 21 is a sign of change in Northern Ireland, of a yearning for a new politics not dependent upon the divisions and mantras of the past. A new politics which refuses to perpetuate the tribalism of the last century. A tribalism which does not describe the diverse and inclusive Northern Ireland of the 21st century. This new Northern Ireland is a creation of the Good Friday Agreement. After great pain of 3 decades of conflict, the agreement gave birth to a new dispensation in Northern Ireland, of devolved government with cross-community inclusion, confidence and consent, of a peaceful society, yes, still challenged by Republican and Loyalist dissidents, but in which the overwhelming majority want the peace to be protected and promoted. Of individuals, families and communities for whom the challenges of building prosperity are now more significant than the agenda of old politics. NI 21 has been created to give voice to the values and the aspirations of this new Northern Ireland. To take forward, as we leave behind the 20th century and face the quite different challenges of the 21st century. So the agreement and a shared island. It is not just a new Northern Ireland to which the agreement gave birth. The agreement brought to an end a century of confrontation, of mutual suspicion and recrimination between both parts of this island. In 1998, a new partnership between Belfast and Dublin emerged. The old myths of the 20th century were put to rest. The myth that consent could be dispensed with and that the democratic will of the people of Northern Ireland was of no consequence. And the myth that 2 parts of this island did not have shared interests that required partnership and institutional cooperation. Consent and partnership, cross-border institutions and shared interests became the architecture of the new relationship on this island, which we all share. Any relationship, of course, cannot remain static. It has to develop, it has to be nurtured, and it has to face new challenges. I want to address how we can develop and nurture this new relationship in the 21st century. So, to think about what the Belfast-Dublin relationship should look like in an Ireland, north and south, that has come of age. So what should the Dublin-Belfast relationship look like together as we face the challenges of the 21st century? I'm going to actually look back for some past wisdom. I began this speech by quoting the words from Michael Collins. Let me now use another quote from a quite different figure of the era of Collins. It is a voice that might even unsettle some of you in the audience in different ways. When King George V opened the new Parliament of Northern Ireland in 1921, he said, I quote, "I appeal to all Irishmen to pause, to stretch out the hand of forbearance and conciliation, to forgive and to forget and to join in making for the land which they love a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill." Those are very, very powerful words that the King spoke that day. Throughout the 20th century, in both parts of this island, we failed to live up to these words. We did not build a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill. In fact, we did the opposite. We kept alive past divisions and past grievances. Despite the words of the King, Unionist Ulster walked away from any sense of shared Irishness, and Nationalist Ireland demonstrated little desire to work in partnership with the jurisdiction it condemned as a failed statelet. Nearly a century on, in a changed island, in a context of new relationships, we have the opportunity of heeding afresh the words of George V, of building a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill on this island of Ireland, which we all share. There are three particular ways in which we might do this, particularly over the next decade. So we have now entered a decade of centenaries, with the Ulster Covenant in 1912, the outbreak of the First World War, the Easter Rising of 1916, the first meeting of Dáil Éireann in 1919, and the Government of Ireland Act in 1920, and the first meeting of the Northern Ireland Parliament in 1921. Each of these centenaries are commemorated. There will, of course, be those who are only too eager to trumpet old divisive narratives of our past on this island. And they will do so precisely to sow new discord and new divisions today. They will do so because they seek to undermine the peace and the new relationships we enjoy on our island today. This underlines the importance of how we all approach these centenaries. If, for example, Unionist Northern Ireland decide that they will not become involved in any way in the commemoration of the 1916 Rising, or if Northern Nationalists and Dublin determine that they will not share in the commemoration of the foundation of the State of Northern Ireland, we will only give aid and succour to those who want to stir up divisions of the past, who want to condemn a new generation, north and south, to being forced to live with the divisions of the 20th century. The truth is that each of these events, whose centenaries fall in this decade, have shaped all of us. They've shaped each and every one of us on this island. North and South, Unionists and Nationalists, each of these events is part of a story that we all share. The story of this island and these islands in the 20th century. Of course, we may not choose to celebrate these events, but I do think we have to engage in commemorating each of them. As a British citizen, as someone who believes in Northern Ireland's place in a contemporary United Kingdom, I would not describe myself as celebrating the Easter Rising. I think it is important, however, that I commemorate it alongside nationalists, that I recognise the fact that it shaped the 20th century, Irish history, and in different ways, all our political convictions. Likewise, I would not ask Northern Nationalists or Dublin to celebrate the Government of Ireland or the first meeting of the Stormont Parliament, but I do think we all have to commemorate these events as helping to define 20th century Ireland and who we are today. And we have a model as to how we can commemorate without denying our own political convictions. When Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II paid her respects to those who had fallen in service of the Republic, She exemplified respectful commemoration. Such respectful commemoration should mark how all of us approach a decade of centenaries. Those who want to resurrect the old divisive myths need to be confronted with the strength and vision of the new relationships on this island, of unionism and nationalism, north and south standing together at each commemoration, saying that we are all shaped and defined by these events, that they are part of the story we share as partners and neighbours. Shared values. Of course, it is not just our past that we share on this island. Today's democratic institutions in Northern Ireland and indeed Ireland, and the diversity in our societies, north and south, point to our shared values. It's perhaps a strange thing to say that after a century of division and confrontation, both the unionism and nationalism which have shaped this island have shared core values. Think, for example, of the Ulster's Covenant's commitment to equal citizenship, to civil and religious freedom and material well-being. Now reflect on the proclamation of the Republic. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens. Of course, neither Unionist Ulster nor Nationalist Ireland always lived up to these values and principles. In fact, in many occasions fell well short of them. But here we see shared democratic values and the aspiration to build states which would reflect these values. A century on, we are closer to living out these values and this aspiration. We have emerged from 3 decades of conflict on this island with robust democratic institutions north and south. Our societies are now much more open, diverse and inclusive than would have seemed possible in the mid-20th century. In both parts of this island, amidst all the challenges of present time, we are committed to building open, competitive, prosperous economies. Not only do these shared values find expression in Belfast and Dublin partnership and in North-South institutions, they are also the core partnership between Ireland and the United Kingdom in the European Union. Here our shared beliefs in open economies, meaningful reform, democratic accountability provide the bedrock for the cooperation in Brussels. It is, in other words, not merely pragmatism which should shape the partnership between Belfast and Dublin, rather it's our shared values. This is a message that both the institutions and the administrations in Dublin and in Belfast must be communicating, that the partnership between both parts of this island is rooted in our shared values, that we are not merely neighbours peering over the fence at each other, but rather partners in a shared enterprise of securing democratic, inclusive and prosperous future for all the people on this island. These are the values underpinning the settled constitutional order in both parts of this island. A settled constitutional order endorsed by all of the people on this island. There is a North-South Belfast-Dublin partnership which promotes the interests of all. There are cross-border bodies which give institutional expression to this partnership. This is a 21st century politics on this island. And any attempt to return to the politics of the 1950s by rejecting the settled constitutional order in favour of the pursuit of orange and green myths is a rejection of democratic, inclusive values of 21st century Ireland. It would be, in the words of Collins, an exercise in listening to long dead generations rather than the living. There is great difference between seeking to condemn the present to the prison of the past and listening to the past wisdom in order to build a progressive and inclusive future. So how do we deepen that partnership? Together on this island we have travelled a long distance from 1916 and 1921, from a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people, from the mother and child schemes from 1969 and the painful years that followed. And I think it was Niall touched on, worth reminding everyone that during the Troubles, like most periods of conflict, significantly more civilians died than either British soldiers, police officers, or paramilitary groups. And so it's very often the civilians that suffer the most. So where next? How do we deepen the partnership between both parts of this island? How do we ensure that we are ready to meet the new challenges and take up new opportunities? So let me go back to that quote from George V, which I used earlier. I appeal to all Irishmen to join in making a land which they love, a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill. The words of the King clearly speak of a shared island. In fact, of an Irishness common to all on this island. We do share the island of Ireland, Unionists and Nationalists, Irish, Anglo-Irish, Scots-Irish. This island is our home. For some of us, myself included, that home also embraces the island to our east. It is worth probably noting that some of the talk, when you quite clearly feel that sort of the British are to blame for everything, you have to remember that in Northern Ireland, when you say that, a sizable chunk of the population think you mean them. On that basis, George V addressed an overwhelmingly Unionist members of the Stormont Parliament as Irishmen. That's an important point, because we particularly now overlook that. He referred to us all as Irishmen. It is a reminder of something that unionism has too easily and all too readily forgotten. That being a British citizen supporting the Union with the rest of the United Kingdom does not mean that we do not share values, interests and an identity with the rest of this island. It does not mean that being British excludes or denies a sense of Irish identity, or indeed a Northern Irish identity. Reflecting on our place on this island, examining what it means that this is part of our identity, part of our story, and who we are and where we come from. This is one of the challenges facing unionism. If we on this island are to experience a truly pluralist and inclusive 21st century, rather than believing that we are condemned to the unreconciled peace, a cultural Cold War between the monolithic British and Irish identities, there is also a challenge for nationalist Ireland. If unionism has failed to listen afresh to the words of George V and to re-embrace its place on this shared island of Ireland, then the Republic has also to recognise that trust and reconciliation will be built through recognising its particular relationships with the rest of these islands. With the United Kingdom, to be a sovereign, independent republic is not to accept a mythical account of ourselves alone. And this perhaps is the challenge posed to contemporary nationalism by Michael Collins. After the treaty, there were those whose adherence to a mythical account of ourselves alone was greater than their commitment to peace in Ireland, to the common flourishing of this island. Collins stood against that myth. He defended a settlement which allowed both parts of this island, for all its flaws, to grow as democratic states, even as the far right and far left established dictatorships across Europe. And I think Jerry touched on this in his opening remarks, that actually the legacy we have from Collins in both North and South is that democracy survived here, for all its flaws, survived through the Civil War and survived all of the problems that ended up happening in Northern Ireland, while many parts of Europe succumbed to dictatorships from both the right and the left. So now, as we in the 21st century and our hopes to build a progressive, pluralist and inclusive future in this island depend on nationalist Ireland again, recognising that the mythical ourselves alone notion has no relevance in today's world. We are, all of us, interdependent on these islands and in Europe. Now there has, in recent decades, been very significant movement by a succession of administrations in the Republic, recognising shared interests and values between London and Dublin. This culminated in the visit of Her Majesty the Queen, a visit to which the public response was overwhelmingly positive. This should, I think, give confidence and courage to decision makers in Dublin to push forward in deepening that sense of partnership and shared values between the United Kingdom and Ireland. Just as unionism has no need to be embarrassed or feel awkward about expressing the Irish dimension to our identity. So nationalist Ireland need not be embarrassed nor awkward about the relationship and partnership between Kingdom and Republic on these islands, nor about the need to deepen this relationship and this partnership. Related to this, there should be openness to recognising and respecting how allegiances to the Crown was a significant factor for very many Irish people of all traditions, both before and after the Act of Union, and indeed the formation of the Free State. We on these islands are not old enemies. In 21st century Europe, we on these islands are friends and partners. With confidence and courage in Belfast and Dublin and London, we should be forcefully articulating this vision of our interdependent relationships on this island and our islands. So in concluding, ladies and gentlemen, my aim tonight has been to give you an idea of the vision that NI21 has for an island come of age. A strong, mature, positive relationship between both parts of our island, flowing from the past that we all share, working as partners with shared values and a common interest in the context of a positive partnership between the United Kingdom and the Republic. We can speak in such terms as, at least partly due to the legacy of Michael Collins in negotiating and defending the treaty. For in doing so, he established the framework for the both parts of Ireland to experience democratic government in the 20th century. The legacy now requires us, in our time, to meet the new challenges, to secure a prosperous, peaceful and inclusive future. We not only have the opportunity to build such a future on this island, we have a responsibility to do so. Prosperous, peaceful, inclusive. Let's have the confidence and the vision to work together to build that future for everyone on Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I thought a very interesting presentation, particularly his views on the way forward, particularly in Northern Ireland. It's interesting, I mean, just looking at what he and Basil are trying to do. So they're a political party effectively born out of in peacetime. A lot of political parties are born out of violent struggle or whatever, but to be born out of peacetime and be trying to go in a different direction and trying to build stronger bridges between communities is something indeed to be admired, and something that I hope that historians will see as a success in the future. So we wish you and Northern Ireland 21 well in the future. It's amazing what struck me during his speech. He was talking about democracy and all that very important sort of principles. And I had thought of something that Niall had said earlier about the RIC leaving Letterkenny and the guards coming in, and they unarmed, and how things were different and so on. And then at the break he showed me a nice photograph which is up here, which he won't let out of his hand, but I can show it to you, and it's the guards, the first, and people can look at it afterwards, and maybe it may be available, a copy of it in some part in Letterkenny or in some place.
Or in the newspapers, might
Or in the newspapers, and it is the guards going in to Dublin Castle, the first guards going into Dublin Castle. And you might say, well, look, God, isn't that interesting? But the interesting thing is there's a Donegal person in the middle of the photograph, and his name,
John Connolly.
John-
from Keene.
John Connolly from Drumkeen. You can see him very clearly in the picture. And John, after he retired, lived in the Port Road. So it's amazing, all the connections that you discover through history. And history, it's a living history. So we're going to move on to somebody else that's making a major difference, and that's our local TD, Joe McHugh. That in terms of what is he doing, I think that one of Joe's successes is that he has built very strong bridges between the border regions in Northern Ireland, and particularly starting before he got involved in party politics. He started that process through community work and community groups, and he is now doing it very effectively politically. So I want to introduce your own local TD, Joe McHugh.
Thanks, Chairman. The Troika have completed their 12th and final review and are leaving town. We will once again regain our economic independence. Will there be bonfires? Will there be dancing at the crossroads? I think not. Mind you, I can only imagine the commentary in 2 years' time, something along the lines of the Troika weren't half as bad as this shirt. A parallel could be drawn with regard to the aftermath of the 1919 War of Independence. In 1922, when Michael Collins assumed control of Dublin Castle from the British, the Irish people got a taste of independence, albeit a divided independence. Pro-treaty versus anti-treaty, parish versus parish, friends versus friends, and tragically family versus family. Lord Birkenhead, at the signing of the treaty, remarked that he may be signing his political death warrant, to which Michael Collins replied, I may be signing my actual death warrant. As you will have heard from our distinguished speakers this evening, Michael Collins was a reluctant negotiator, who was also aware that the treaty was always going to be the best outcome under extremely difficult challenges, and especially in the province of Ulster. So how did the deal affect Ulster and its constituent parts? The Government of Ireland Act, which John referred to in 1920, was already in place prior to the signing of the treaty. This was legislation enacted in Westminster. The Act introduced a partition line, which still remains to this day. The Act did envisage a Council of Ireland at a later stage to work towards Irish unity. However, the Civil War and the creation of the Irish Free State effectively ended that vision of a Council of Ireland. The Government of Ireland Act was succeeded by the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, otherwise known as a Belfast Agreement amongst unionist circles. So how major was the Ulster question during the treaty negotiations? Key negotiators on the British side included Churchill, Chamberlain, and then Prime Minister Lloyd George, and the two chief Irish negotiators, Collins and Griffith, who came with a default strategy around Ulster, or around the Ulster question, becoming the deal breaker. Things didn't get that far, for in the final analysis, the choice was sign or a resumption of the war. So how would the Michael Collins vision for Ireland or Ulster measure up with today's scenario? 3,000 people dead in a 30-year period on the streets of Northern Ireland, thousands injured, and thousands more weighed down with a legacy of the past that doesn't go away and will not go away. Our own county of Donegal was dislocated from both the north and the south through economic partition and decades of political neglect. Similarly, counties west of the Bann, including Derry, Fermanagh and Tyrone, experienced political neglect from the centre of power at Westminster. Do you think at one stage that the London Derry to Strabane railway line was once known as the Midland Line? If you look on a map, it is probably equidistant from Burtonport to Belfast. And then Dublin wonders at times why Donegal vote no consistently in referenda. As a fellow explained after voting no in the children's referendum, his rationale was quite simple. The option of no was on the ballot sheet. How one line on a map can change the unique interrelationships at a community, business and economic level. During the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, the European colonial powers began a process of dividing Africa to meet their own strategic interests with a complete disregard to community ties, demographics or ethno-tribal relations. Lord Salisbury pointed out, white men are drawing lines on a map where no man has trod before, giving away and dividing mountains and lakes to be met with the impediment of not knowing that they actually existed in the first place. When one considers the impact on this county of Donegal of a 144 kilometres boundary with Northern Ireland and a 7 kilometres boundary with the Republic of Ireland, we in this part of the world know only too well the consequences of white men drawing lines on a map. All these years later, where has the Michael Collins vision of Ireland taken us? While history and Michael Collins himself records that signing the treaty was like signing his own death warrant, it also reflects that it was the best possible deal under the very difficult circumstances. And while sovereign arrangements remain unchanged, we do find ourselves in a different space with an ever-changing landscape and a running order of new challenges. Michael Collins took the gun out of Irish politics, and when the chips were down, Michael Collins had the courage, conviction and leadership to take the tough decisions. He knew by signing the treaty it was the right thing to do, even though it was universally unpopular. He also had to defend his choice in the Dáil and also in the midst of a civil war. The challenge for this generation of politicians is to take the fear out of politics. In the work I do with my colleagues across the border, both nationalists and unionists, be it in the area of infrastructure, roads or broadband, healthcare, or plans for radiotherapy services in Derry, there is a unifying goal, a common purpose for the needs of our constituents, both north and south. Whether the issues are about marginalised youths in loyalist areas of East Belfast, or unemployment challenges in this town of Letterkenny, the largest town in Ulster, the needs are the same. The Michael Collins transition from guerrilla warfare to peaceful means, from violence to dialogue, has to be the template for the society this region richly deserves. I welcome the presence of Breach Rogers here tonight, former deputy leader of the SDLP party and stalwart in her advocacy for peace and reconciliation on this island. I also welcome John McAllister. John, along with his colleague Basil McRae, are challenging the status quo and looking at things differently in Northern Ireland. A Northern Ireland crying out for something new and responsive to the needs of 21st century Northern Ireland. Judith Gillespie, Deputy Chief Constable of the PSNI, at a meeting in London recently, challenged politicians to take risk in their approach to politics. I call this fresh thinking. That combined, these ideas, and more importantly, this unwavering belief that we can achieve something better for our future, will allow us to paint a new canvas, one where all backgrounds are welcome and accepted. Seamus Mallon has said his generation of politicians helped construct the institutional mechanism through the Good Friday Agreement, and it's up to this generation of politicians to tackle the constitutional challenges that lie ahead. During a speech in 2011 in Dublin Castle, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth spoke about the significant developments that have occurred between our nations in recent years and the importance of forgiveness and collective collaboration. She said, "The lessons of the peace process are clear. Whatever life throws at us, our individual responsibilities, will be all the stronger for working together and sharing the load. Now the responsibility is a political one, an obligation that rests with politicians to raise the bar and the challenge to provide a better society, both north and south, for this generation and the next. We are nearing the 100th anniversary of the Great War, where 35,000 Irishmen and almost 900,000 British soldiers lost their lives. The British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, which I co-chair, will be marking the anniversary in Dublin in March next year, and this is an opportunity for both Irish and British leaders across the Irish Sea to come together and to show people on both sides of the border that the commitment for peace is as strong and alive as ever. With this in mind, and through your own contacts, John, with your influence in Westminster, I publicly invite the British Prime Minister David Cameron to join with the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly in commemorating a dark period in European history whereby young Irish and British men died side by side in the trenches of the Somme and on the beaches of Normandy during World War I. In 1999, I was faced with a choice. I chose to join Fine Gael. And at that time, I remember people saying to me, "Why Fine Gael, Joe? Are they not pro-unionist? Are they not a pro-unionist party?" I saw things differently. I saw the Fine Gael party reaching out to unionism. The Fine Gael's party policy in Northern Ireland was to respect differences and cultural identity, and to acknowledge that we live in a pluralist society. At the time, I was working as a community youth worker in this town on a peace and reconciliation funded project in Letterkenny, so I believe that my progression to electoral politics on the Fine Gael ticket was in keeping with my own ideological beliefs. Michael Collins' legacy will continue to inspire all his admirers. There are even some in Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil who will acknowledge this transition from the politics of the gun to the politics of peace. However, his work is not finished. The good citizens of Donegal are acutely aware of the fragility of the peace process, and even 15 years into a peace agreement, it is still very much in its infancy. We need to continue to talk, to avoid complacency, and work towards a sustainable future for all Ulster men and women, respecting ideology, different religious beliefs and political beliefs. I would like to sign off on the words of the great man himself when he contributed to a Dáil debate in 1921. In my opinion, it gives us freedom, not the ultimate freedom that all nations desire, but the freedom to achieve it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. And one of the things that struck me when Joe was talking is that, you know, for us to reach out, we need to know ourselves what we stand for, and you only know what you stand for when you understand history. And that's why it's very important nights like tonight that help us to get to know ourselves better and where we've come from. Our next speaker and our penultimate speaker is Bríd Rogers, a daughter of the county, a former Donegal Person of the Year, somebody who I have admired all my life as somebody, as a woman, has made a difference in a male bastion that politics certainly was when Bríd was there in the front line in Northern Ireland. So, Bríd Rogers, over to you.
I'm only going to try to put this down. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Could you Natasha? I'm glad to be back home. It's nice to see very friendly faces, a lot of whom I know and some of whom are my relations. and I have to tell Denny McGill, my tonsils taken out too by Dr. McGill a long time before you, Denny. And in relation to Donegal says no, I'm surprised to find, not surprised to find that we have something at last in common with the Reverend Ian Paisley. Because as John Hume used to say, if you took no of the out of the English language, he'd be speechless. However, 27 years ago, I was very privileged to be asked to give the Michael Collins oration in Bellnabla. 27 years ago, I wasn't grey like I am now. However, a lot has changed in the meantime, and there are times when I think that some things never change. But the reason I believe I was told I was asked is because I was doing an Irish language programme with, I forget the name of the guy who did it, but he asked me during the programme who did I admire, who are my heroes, and I said Michael Collins and Gandhi. And he said, that's a strange combination, he said, a man of the gun and a man of non-violence. But that was the truth. And although I've always have admired Michael Collins, and he has been a hero of mine, I haven't really thought of him as a man of violence in that sense, because Michael Collins lived in a different era, in a different context, and was working in a different context to what I was then working in Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland we were experiencing what I would call a sectarian conflict, an ugly war, in which many young, misguided people from both sides, from the Republican side, people who thought they were fighting for a united Ireland and to get the British out of Ireland, and who, a lot of them were brought into that struggle or that conflict by their own experiences and their families' experiences of discrimination and being oppressed under what they saw as what was unionist domination. And a lot of the loyalist young people were brought in because they thought they were fighting to keep away the United Ireland out and to keep the British in, but they were also fighting because they were afraid. They were afraid of what was going to happen to them, and they would lose everything that they held dear and their culture and all of that. So they were, I think, some of them, many of them, they were not necessarily bad people, although there were psychopaths on both sides. But they were not, all those young people were not bad people, they were just misguided. But in recent years, there has been a tendency to compare Gerry Adams to Michael Collins, even though Gerry, of course, was never in the IRA, you have to remember. But that he was the gunman, again, never in the IRA, turned to politics the same as Michael Collins. But notwithstanding the fact that Gerry was never in the IRA, I don't think the comparison stands up. Because in my views, Michael Collins was a patriot in the real sense of the word. Because at the early age of 31, 5 years into the War of Independence, he put the welfare of the people of Ireland ahead of his own welfare. And he, having led the fight for Irish independence and having gone over to the negotiations in London, he faced the prospect of a terrible war being waged against his people and of coming away with nothing. He recognised that if he hadn't signed the treaty, the politics of all or nothing very often left you with nothing. And he also recognised what suffering would be brought on the Irish people. And he recognised that this was the best that was on offer, as Dinny and others have already said. And for that reason he signed the treaty, recognising that, as people have already said, that he would be signing his own death warrant. But he also did it because he was a man of vision, and he was able to recognise that here was an opportunity to develop something that really could be for the betterment of the whole of Ireland. And recognising that opportunity, he grasped it, knowing that there would be difficulties. But he talked about the freedom to achieve freedom, and he talked about stepping stones, one step at a time. And in that sense, I believe that the reason that I identified with Michael Collins was because he was able to face reality. He wasn't just, and I think it was Dinny that said it earlier, he wasn't just a man who was all idealism with no practicality. And all idealism is very good, and I have nothing against idealists, but idealists very often don't achieve a lot. It's the pragmatists and the people who can face reality who do. And interestingly enough, the first document that the SDLP ever brought out was called Facing Reality. And what we were saying then was, we are now in a context where we're deadlocked, because Nationalist Ireland's view is the only people who count are the majority on the island. Not the majority in the north, but the majority on the island are the only ones who have the right to self-determination. And that was the position of Nationalist Ireland. And of course the Unionists had a totally different view, because they said they were going to what we have we hold, not an inch, and we're not going to budge. And that was deadlock. So really what we were saying at that stage was, we have to face reality and recognise that Unionists are a long time on this island, probably was one myself, with a name like Stratford at one stage. I'm bound to have some kind of blue blood in me, John. You were probably Scottish. Anyway, we did realise, and we did say, we have to recognise that the Unionists have a right to be what they are and where they are, and we have to accommodate that. But we also have to ask Unionists to recognise that we, the Nationalists in Northern Ireland, have rights too. And we are not Unionists, and we have a right in our own country, in this part of the country, to be able to express ourselves and our nationalism, and to have equal rights, and so on. So that was facing the reality that we were different people, but we had to learn to live together, and we had to be equal. Now, one of I don't want to go on too long, because I know it's late and you're probably all getting tired, but I want to just deal with the fact of the comparison between Gerry Adams and Michael Collins. And I want to make the point that in recent years, I believe history is being rewritten at an awful rate. And we are being told, for instance, and before I say this, I want to say one thing. It's accepted certainly by nationalists in Northern Ireland, that the loyalist UVF and UFF did go out to kill Catholics. They didn't go out to kill maybe they thought because Catholics might have been sympathetic to the IRA or to Sinn Féin or whatever, but an awful lot of the deaths were just Catholics who were handy targets. Nothing to do, many of them nothing to do with any politics, with anything whatsoever. And I'm thinking of the murders of people who happen to be presidents of GAA clubs. I'm thinking of the two innocent boys in my own area, Rory and Gerard Cairns, 19 and 22-year-old, within a week of the Shankill bombing, when the UVF had said that the nationalist people would pay dearly for what had happened. And that, of course, was the usual in Northern Ireland, one crowd tit for tat against the other. When there was a loyalist murder, there would be a Republican one, and then Republic, there would be another one. But these two men were sitting in their own kitchen with their 11-year-old sister who had just celebrated her birthday, and two loyalist gunmen came in, shot them at point-blank range, just because they happened to be handy Catholics. Their father had gone out to collect their mother from Mass. Now that's the sort of thing that was happening. So I'm not saying that it wasn't happening on both sides. But what I want to say, and it was recognised that, you know, it was just a case of killing a Catholic wherever you could get a Catholic. But there is a sort of a myth being perpetrated now that the IRA, of course, never did that. They never killed innocent victims. It was always the security forces or whatever else, that they didn't target innocent civilians. Well, those of you who are not around in the 70s, and particularly the people who are now in their 20s and in their 30s and in their 40s, I think they're entitled to know the stark truth. because a lot of the people, those people, weren't even born in 1972 when the worst bloodshed happened in Northern Ireland. And I want to just give a few instances of what happened. Bloody Friday in Belfast in July 1972, 20 bombs went off in the city. 20 bombs. You think of it. Does anybody in their right mind think they can set off 20 bombs in a busy city and nobody gets killed? Just think about that. Now, those bombs went off. 9 people were killed. A 14-year-old schoolboy and a mother, a 37-year-old mother whom I happen to know and whose husband I have met. They had 7 children. She was buried on her 12th wedding anniversary. They were all killed on Bloody Sunday. Now, they were all innocent civilians, none of them involved. She was out shopping. Now, we are told they weren't targeted. Well, maybe they weren't targeted. Was it just collateral damage, that awful word? Whatever it was, they were innocent civilians, and don't let anyone tell me that the people who went out to plant 20 bombs really thought there wouldn't be innocent civilians killed. Now, within 10 days of that atrocity, we had the Claudy bombing, 9 other innocent lives, the youngest an 8-year-old girl and the eldest a 68-year-old man. And this just a few months after the British had killed 18 or 13 innocent people, innocent civilians in Derry. So I'm not saying that any side had a monopoly on violence or terror, but what I am saying is that to pretend that one side did not kill any innocent civilians is just simply not true. The napalm bomb at the Lamont Hotel in 1978, where there were members of an Irish Collie Club and the Northern Ireland Junior Motorcycle Club holding annual dinners. Now, are they innocent civilians? 12 people were killed in that, and many others maimed and injured and badly burnt and still suffering to this day. 30 of them badly burnt, and a napalm bomb where the flames just spread right through the place. Now, those are just a few examples, and there are many others at the hands of loyalists and the British forces as well. But to have lived through the 1970s in Northern Ireland was like living through a never-ending nightmare. And every student of history, of Irish history, and I was talking to one of them here tonight earlier on, should read Lost Lives. I don't know if you've heard of the book, some of you will have. It's a litany, an awful sad litany of the endless tragedies and the unbearable human suffering, not to mention the awful history of the disappeared. That was written by David McKittrick and others. There were 4 of them wrote it, but it gives a history of every single murder and, you know, the story of what happened at the time. It's a very, very big tome, and I was saying to John McAllister earlier on, interestingly enough, the most part of that tome, the biggest part of it, and it's a very big book, more than half of it, is just the 1970s. It was a horrific time in Northern Ireland. More than 1,500 Catholics and more than 1,200 Protestants lost their lives in the Troubles. And the truth is that the IRA accounted for more Catholic deaths than any of the other forces, British, Loyalist or anyone. 338 in total were killed by the IRA, and they also accounted for 49% of all the deaths. Now, I do acknowledge, and I don't underestimate, the important role that Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness have played in bringing this awful cycle of violence to an end. But could they now bring themselves to acknowledge that that long campaign and all the suffering it inflicted, not least on the families of the disappeared who are still suffering, was misguided, not just wrong, misguided, and was a failure, because it didn't bring about their Irish unity and Brits out as they wanted it. And if they could bring themselves to say to the dissidents, instead of condemning them as they do, and rightly they do, because even coming down in the car today, I heard about a policeman finding a bomb under his car as he was bringing his child to school this morning. Luckily he found him and he wasn't killed, but those people are still around. They have to be told that that conflict or war or whatever you call it that was carried out by the IRA was a failure. It didn't succeed in doing, it didn't get the Brits out, and it won't get the Brits out, because there's one of the Brits there, and I have a lot of respect for him. I knew him when I was the Minister for Agriculture because he was in the Young Farmers Union, and he used to be, he told me one time he was acting in a play, and do you know what part he was playing? You'll never guess it, John the 23rd. Anyway, so it would be helpful if the dissidents could be told that whatever, if their motive is to get the Brits out, to get the British out of Ireland, it ain't going to work, and killing more people and causing more misery is only just going to cause more suffering. So the truth is that not only did it not get their stated aim, the truth is that it actually increased the sectarian hatred and mistrust between the people and made the reconciliation more difficult between unionism and nationalism, and therefore put the hope for Irish unity in the foreseeable future further away. The Good Friday Agreement that John has spoken of was, in the words of Seamus Mallon, Sunningdale for slow learners, because it really was what we got in the Good Friday Agreement with the same as Sunningdale. Unfortunately, after Sunningdale, we didn't have a Michael Collins in the Republican movement. If we had, it would have been accepted, and things could have been different. Of course, the Unionists didn't accept it at the time. Nevertheless, it could have changed the context. How many lives could have been saved? How much tragedy and suffering could we have avoided if the Republican movement and the unionism, apart from Faulkner unionism, which I suspect if he was around today, and he probably wasn't even born then, he would have been a part of, if they had been able to accept what they accepted 25 years later. What a pity that the men of violence refused to heed John Hume when he told them that the answer was spilling their sweat and not their blood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Breed, for reminding us of our recent history and lessons we haven't learned, or we hope we now have learned. What I want to do now is just to introduce the grandniece of Michael Collins, who will just talk to you about the family reflection on Michael Collins. So, Joan, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jimmy and Tom and all the 21 Society for inviting me here tonight. I'm always thrilled to be able to talk about Michael Collins, but I do feel a bit of a fraud here because all these people who have spoken before are involved. They're trying to make the country and the society a better place. They're involved in politics. They're doing something for their country, as Michael Collins did. I do nothing. All I am is, by an accident of birth, I'm here. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And the other thing is, the family I came from, I'll tell you a little bit about that now, because last night my daughter-in-law Maria sent me this email, an extract from Michael Collins' The Final Days. In the latter half of the 17th century, the Collins family was evicted from their home in Limerick. They were troublesome even then and caused so many problems that the decision of the magistrate was to banish this unruly and troublesome clan to the nethermost regions of the King's realm, known as West Cork, where they and their descendants would never again cause any difficulty to His Majesty's men and women. In this they succeeded for a few hundred years, but after this lapse, Michael Collins made up for it. And his achievements, I suppose, as a statesman, as an idealist and a pragmatist, as Breed just said, and above all as a peacemaker, have been well documented. Last night I counted 21 books on my shelves about him. And the speakers here tonight have spoken very eloquently on his public persona. I'm going to just give you a little few, I know you're tired now at this stage, but I'll give you a few little anecdotes and something a little bit about his private, the private persona and the legacy that he left to us as a family. And one of the first memories I have is when we were young, we had a little dressing up box. And in the box was a soldier's cap and a belt and a coat. And we realised later that they were actually my mother's Uncle Michael's clothes, which now are in the museum in Cork, you'll be glad to hear. So first of all, my grandmother, Mary, was Michael Collins' older sister. She was about 9 years older. Now, when she grew up and got married, she had 9 children, of whom my mother was the 4th. And she was widowed very young, and her youngest baby was only 6 weeks old. And things were very hard, so I suppose she was lucky enough to get a job in the civil service. She had to go back to work. Now, Michael, her younger brother, took a great interest in the family, and he became a kind of a surrogate father to those children. They all spoke very highly of him, his fun and his liveliness and the presence that he brought to them and that. And he visited them a lot until it became too dangerous, really. But when we were growing up, we really didn't get any, there was very little talk about Michael Collins at school, as you said earlier, at school or at home. And as well as the facts about Ireland, there was a book written in 1966, which I have at home. It's called The Course of Irish History. And I just went through it last night. There were about, I think, maybe 3 lines about Michael Collins. But I have here actually an account written by my grandmother to me. She wrote it obviously when I was young, but I only got it a couple of years ago. She dedicated it to my grandchild Joan, and in the foreword she says, "One of my grandchildren, Joan, was asked a question in school some time ago, who was Michael Collins? She answered, he was my granny's brother and he was killed. So she asked me to tell his story, and now in the peace of my twilight, I shall try and record my memories." So it has never been published, or I think it's about 20 pages, it's quite interesting. Then I come to my mother. My mother idolised her Uncle Michael. As I said, he was very involved in her family, so she knew him, she had memories of him, but she didn't really talk to us about him. And maybe what I say now will make it clear as to why she didn't. She lived in Cork, but she was sent to boarding school in Eccles Street in Dublin. And she really didn't like it. She was very lonely, very homesick. And Uncle Michael, as he was to her, as you know, was involved in treaty negotiations in London, and he used to return at weekends. And he used to go to her school and bring her out and bring her over to her Uncle Johnny's house in Dublin. And then on Sunday evening, when he was going back to London again, he would collect her and bring her back to school, and he would check on her progress, because her mother was working in Cork and her father was dead, so there was nobody really to take an interest in her. And then on the 22nd of August 1922, my grandmother and an uncle of mine went to the Imperial Hotel in Cork City to meet Michael, who was on his way to West Cork. He had a terrible cold, and she tried to dissuade him from going, but to no avail. And of course he met his death that evening in Ballinablaw. And that was the day of my mother's 15th birthday. And when I think about that, I get very upset, because you all remember, we all know what it's like to be 15 and to be excited and everything, and for that to happen. So I think that explains her reluctance to talk about that sad day and all that led up to it. But a few years ago, I suppose long after my mother had died, I asked an aunt, why didn't she talk more about it? We didn't hear anything. It was only later on. And she just said, look, she didn't want to pass on the painful memories. She didn't want to pass on the bitterness of the Civil War, as you said earlier, family against family, town against town. And she had been babysitting for a family in Blackrock, and they told her, sorry, we don't want you anymore now after the Civil War. So it must have been terribly painful for her. And then, of course, in 1996, all changed, because the film came out. Now, it might seem a bit trivial, but the film did have a big effect on the family, I think, because we were at a special screening in Cork of the film, and it was just for the family and the extended family. And when the film was over, there was just total silence. And because there were people, there were sisters, aunts and uncles who remembered him, and they were just totally overcome. And at the reception afterwards, one of my aunts, when asked by Liam Neeson what she thought of the film, said, "You didn't just act the part, you lived it." I think Neil Jordan probably idealised Collins a bit in the film, I must say, and maybe he was a bit unfair to De Valera, but suddenly everyone wanted to talk about Michael Collins. It was a total revelation to me because nobody had wanted to talk about him in school. We didn't know anything about him, we didn't hear about him, and then, as I said, at home, you didn't hear much about it. I didn't hear anything either. I suppose, was particularly conscious of the effect the film had on young people, because at the time I was teaching French and German, and the students used to say, talk to us about Michael Collins. And of course I would be delighted, this is great, I can talk about him now, and I was finding out new things. But of course then I also realised that they were using diversionary tactics. Anything was better than French verbs or German grammar. And it just reminded me that I used to do the same actually, because Maeve Binchy taught us for a year in Cork, and we used to try and get her to tell us stories. And she was a past master at that, and we delighted in her anecdotes, which beat doing Latin grammar any day. So I'm just thrilled to have this chance to ramble on about the big fellow and to give you some idea of what he means to us as a family. I suppose I would like to think that his legacy was a society that is non-denominational, non-sectarian, non-party, and that peace between countries and communities, which is what everyone has been talking about, is what we should all aspire to. No country or culture is better than another. No religion is superior to another, and we should all strive to live in peace and harmony. I mean, that's idealistic, I know, but in these difficult times, I think we should also remember maybe John F. Kennedy's words when he said, "Don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Gurv Míle Maith.
Joan, I just thought that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And it's a bit like when you go somewhere and suddenly you discover something that was there all the time, but you didn't realise was there all the time. So I think it's great to have her living among you. And one of the things I would say, the Collins 22 Society will be very quickly on, they'll be very keen to publish that account, because what we want to try and do is keep history alive. And there are a lot of things out of today that we discovered, or tonight that we discovered, that we want to try and keep alive, and we'll find the resources to do it. But I just thought it was great. If you're really probably scared now that I'm going to summarise all night, all those speakers and all those fine things that were said, I'm not sure whether we open to the floor now or we just conclude and we all go home. One or two, I'm sure, would like to ask questions, so I think maybe a couple of minutes for questions. I'm conscious of time. We won't delay you more than 10 minutes. There's a draw to be held. I'm told if I win, I have to give it back. Johnny McCollum told me that, so we'll just take one or two questions.
I'd like to thank them, and particularly the speakers from Northern Ireland. I want in particular, however, to thank the two female speakers, because I think they brought a human dimension to Michael Collins tonight. First of all, the personal dimension to Michael Collins and his relationship with his family, and secondly, I think Paige brought home to us very clearly the reality of violence and what being a revolutionary really means in real terms. Now, when I came in tonight, I looked and I saw the fantastic iconography here of Michael Collins. That's Michael Collins, the revolutionary. But I think, and I want to direct my question here to Jerry O'Connell, because when Jerry hopefully will get the statue erected of Michael Collins in 1922, or in 2022, he will have a very difficult choice to make, because the choice will it be Michael Collins a politician, or will it be Michael Collins a revolutionary? Now, Michael Collins was a brilliant revolutionary and a great soldier, but at the end of the day, he recognised that soldiering and revolution does not really work. You have to sit down and negotiate, and you have to be a politician. So I hope that in 2022 that will be remembered, and that Collins, the politician, the pragmatic, the negotiator, will take precedence over the revolutionary. Thank you.
About coincidences, because just that very issue we recently had in our party headquarters, where we were putting up a photograph of Michael Collins, and it was exactly that, politician or revolutionary, and obviously we went on the side of the politician. Other questions to be asked, and I give Jerry an opportunity to respond. Yeah, sorry. Declan, here.
Well, first of all, I could have said to my good friend Joe, you stole the show. my question, in a sense, follows on from the question that Eilish has posed, and there's no doubt about it that Collins will go down in history as a great Irishman. His place is assured. But when he died in August of 22, he died a couple of weeks after another great Irishman, Arthur Griffith, died. And Collins at that stage, of course, was Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Chief of Staff. And the man who took over from him was Richard Mulcahy. And Richard Mulcahy had to take all the flak, the outpouring, if you like, from the Civil War. And my question to the panel, to anybody in the panel, maybe Jerry would take this up when he's replying to Eilish, is to what extent did the legacy of Collins underscore what Irish history thinks of Richard Mulcahy?
Okay, we'll take one more question, then maybe we'll ask Jerry inevitable task of responding on behalf of all of the panel. One other question, if there's another question? Maybe not. Is there a, no? No, that's it. And then we'll have the draws, who has the tickets, and we'll get it ready. So Jerry, this is a hospital pass.
All right.
And I was told not to mention Michael Collins of the GA, but he was very involved in a club called the Geraldines in London, so I got it in anyway.
Thanks very much for the question, both questions. I'll take Mulcahy first, if that's okay. I think there's a certain truth in what you're saying. I mean, Mulcahy wrote in the aftermath of Collins's death. By the aftermath, I mean the last 24 hours after bail and law, the famous speech to the army where he said to people, "Stand calmly by your posts and do not dishonour our great leader." I mean, Mulcahy played an absolutely critical role the day or two after bail and law to ensure that the country didn't descend into utter anarchy, and that there wasn't there was no reprisals for Michael Collins' death. Now, Breed Rogers spoke very eloquently about the horror that was the Northern Troubles, and a lot of that was the tit for tat element. Michael Collins' assassination, probably the most significant political killing of the War of Independence. There were no reprisals, and I think a lot of that has to do with Mulcahy's utter discipline that he imposed upon the National Army. That's something that doesn't particularly ever get discussed or he's honoured for. And I think as well, Mulcahy sometimes the formation of the first inter-party government in 1948 and the fact that he stood aside, he could have insisted about becoming Taoiseach. He was president of Fine Gael after the 48 general election. There was a massive coalition. You had everyone from Clonard Talún, the new Clonard Public, the two versions of the Labour Party, a Fine Gael party that was emaciated in that general election, down to about 19% of the vote, but still managed to come back and seize power. And Mulcahy threw it all away. He threw it up and he said, look, there's people like Sean McBride who, were on the different side to me in the Civil War. And he said, I cannot, I can't expect people I can't expect me to be the physical obstacle to the formation of a change of government. and he stood aside for Jack Costello, and that inter-party government was formed. So I think Mulcahy's legacy, you used the phrase underscored, I think it certainly is absolutely underscored. And there's been no real proper, definitive biography done of him. As a Lithuanian historian actually who has written the best work on Mulcahy. But the greatest scandal of all about it was, and I discovered this in Granard, the last Collins night we had before we came here was in Kitty Kiernan's home place, the Greville Arms Hotel in Granard, where the Kiernan family were born and reared and was the place of business of the Kiernans and the Kiernan sisters. So we were in Granard 3 weeks ago, and a man came up to me afterwards and he said, you're from Tipperary, I'm from Killinall, I'm just outside Thurles. And there's a graveyard on the old Dublin Cork Road called Ballymarine Cemetery, between the parish of Littleton. Mightn't mean much to most people here. But Mulcahy is buried in a very nondescript corner of that cemetery. No state recognition whatsoever. No flag, no nothing. Nothing to commemorate the fact he was Commander-in-Chief of the Army, absolutely nothing. And a man said this to me, he said, is there anything that can be done about this? Now, obviously, his family are still alive and, it's a family issue, but it would truly shock you to see how Mulcahy is remembered. And I really think that the government or somebody should step in there, and the army. He was a commander-in-chief of the National Army, and he was the man I would hold responsible for keeping keeping a lid on the sulphuric levels of reprisal and recrimination that could have got out there the week after Bail of Law, and you could have been talking about multiple casualties. But I totally support where you're coming from there. I'd personally like to see something done about his grave for a start. Anyway, it's a solid disgrace that the man is effectively, you wouldn't know who he was or what he was. In relation to Ailish's question of the statue, my personal preference would be for him to be depicted in civilian dress. His military, the iconography is a good word, because the word an icon effectively is something that we channel our reverence towards, but it really is only an artistic representation of a person. It's not the real person. Joan Murphy spoke about the real person. The legacy of Michael Collins is multi-layered, from the Gaelic revivalist in London, the GAA administrator, the person who took the Count Plunkett side in 1916 in the GPO, the Minister for Finance, National Loan, Intelligence War, all of that. And the negotiator, the political leader, the campaigner. I think the most compelling images of Collins, and what I would like to see represented if that statue ever becomes a reality, are the famous, and I think, Tom, we actually donated a picture to Fine Gael a few years ago of them, the famous rallies that took place in that treaty election. The treaty election of June 1922, when the treaty settlement was put before the people, following the Dáil vote. And those massive rallies, hundreds of thousands of people, well, maybe not, but maybe about tens of thousands of people, maybe up to 100,000 people, like in Patrick Street in Cork, in O'Connell Street in Dublin, in the square in Thurles, wherever, gathering to hear Collins and gathering to hear De Valera speak. The two great leaders of that period. And you've Collins there dressed in the three-piece suit, and he's slashing down on the hand, and that's the image I would like to see him depicted as. He is selling his political settlement, or his vision of a new Ireland, to the people. And that's democracy. And that's the most important thing I think about Collins, is he made democracy possible in this country. And it's that depiction I'd like to see depicted. But
Okay.
it'll be for others to decide.
Thank you very much, Gary. Just to say, in wrap up, a very practical issue. A car, if anybody here owns a car, 08DL2079, a Toyota, it's blocking the Dunn Stores car park exit. And I hope the keys aren't here. If the keys are up here, you're doubly embarrassed. Could we have those that are conducting the draw, or is it like other draws, it's already over? Joan is going to pull the winning ticket. No. Right? I pulled my own out of my pocket and read it out. It's, is that not very good in the colours? 396 to 400, the code AV7W6J44. Pink. And not very good. I was always told about pink. Make the girls wink, but it never worked for me. Oh, for God's sake. Is it you, Sean? You people, I'm glad. We're having another one. That can't be a member of the Collins Society. Oh, and they're hoping to start, on a serious point when we're getting this on their way, they're hoping to start Collins Society group here in the county. So if anybody is interested in assisting in starting that group in the county, and maybe to look at some of the stuff that Declan was talking about as well, if they could give their names as the exit and contact details. It's a yellow ticket, and it's 91 to 95, and it's AB172J44. Yellow. Which Bernard wins first prize. A bottle of whiskey. Bernard's a teetotaler. I hope he'll give it back. This is going to be a very long raffle. It's a pink ticket, 1 to 5. 1 to 5. So whoever wins this has to take it. And if you're a teetotaler, you can pour it out. 1 to 5. Pink, man at the back. Give it. Right, I'm told it's green. 326 to 330. Green. Right. Green is keeping me right on my colours. Somebody down here, lady here.
Yeah, a meal for two in the station house.
A meal for two in the station house. A relation of breed. No, which is breed. You kept me right. I was sure. Is that not? She told me this was green. That's the one I thought. Now I know why. Right. Is there one more?
Path to Freedom.
Path to Freedom, Michael Collins' book, and that's a pink ticket. I'm really improving. 411 to 415. Pink. Yeah. Lady at the back coming up. Oh, it's a what? Oh, you better give her the choice. Right, you have it. So. All right. And the last one is a turkey, but I think it's oven ready as distinct from that you have to take it home tonight. Now some of the people around here would pluck it fairly quick for you. Read yellow. There must be another relation of hers about to win another.
Tell you the number as well.
Aye, Bree told me that the ticket that her relation has is yellow and it's 216 to 220. 216 to 220. Or have they gone home? Oh no, we haven't. Right. You've won yourself a turkey, a £5 turkey. And that's before we stuff it. So, just seriously, the draw is concluded, the night is concluded, not quite, oh jeez, it's always the way, they tell me I made it balls, but again, he'll be saying. I'd just like to thank you all very much. It's been a long night, I hope you found it very interesting. It's about living history. To all of the panel, an excellent job, to particularly the people from Northern Ireland. And absolutely delighted to have you. thank you all. Jimmy, hand over to you.
Okay, listen, thanks a million everybody. It's great to see so many out in such great numbers. It's been a fantastic night, I think you'll all agree. Thanks to everyone here at the table, they've all been brilliant. A couple of small presentations just to make to the speakers. So could I have Paddy Gilday and Doreen Sheridan Kennedy up here, who also helped with the organising of this night, so I'll get them to make these presentations. First to our chairman, Tom Kern.
Paddy has given me a £3 turkey. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's like these.
Oh, you were meant to do that. She was meant to do that.
Oh, sorry, sir.
We start again.
Right, we'll start over again. Tom, you're going to help this time. Right, this next one's for Joan Murphy. I'm just taking an order in front of me here, and I'm going to get Doreen or Paddy to present it. And it's fun. This is lifetime membership of the Michael Collins Society, so welcome to your own family, Joan. And I'm sure John McAllister will appreciate lifetime membership of the Collins Society as well.
Just what I've always needed. Thank you.
Paddy, the very same prize goes to Breeze Rogers. To Deputy Joe McHugh. Thank you, Joe. And to Ned McGinley. One wee final thing here is just a little token thing for Jim Nevin for all the help that he gave us, and it's a little pen. I could tell you, it's a pen from the two wee guys from Gweedore, the Rogers brothers. It's a Bog Oak. It's about 700 years old, and we couldn't afford to buy anything new.
Thank you so much.
One more certificate here is for a very important man. And there's a story behind this too. This is the final membership one, but it's for Minister McGinley. Minister McGinley was, we had him down as a speaker, and then we thought he couldn't make it, so being the prudent people at Bear, we immediately cancelled the certificate. These are tight times we're living in. Anyway, he came back to me then very late in the week and said that he was able to speak. So we had to get this flown down by the government jet to Carrickfergus Airport today. And we have a certificate for him, but we didn't have time to get a frame. So Jimmy, you'll have to come back next year for the frame. I think that's it, folks. Listen, thanks a million. It's been a great night. Thank you very much.